welcome to the NYC Workforce Drop. This is a special summer edition. You know, we were literally like going to restart for season 2, and then I felt like I had to have the council member here. I had to have Althea Stevens here with us because I want to talk about the last couple months. I want to talk about where we are as a city. I want to talk about what it means to be a council member at this particular moment in time. I want to talk about the Bronx. And council member, you and I did a video thing back pretty much when I started. You were the first council member that I talked to in this role because I know you know the nonprofit sector. I know you know workforce development. Anyone who's been a part of a hearing that you've ever been part of knows how you hold folks accountable, how you hold yourself accountable for meeting the needs of New Yorkers. Councilmember Stevens, I wanted you to be here because I wanted to say to you, you don't like thank yous. I know that. You don't like your gratitude. She's making a face. I don't even like gratitude, but I appreciate who you are in this work on the daily, and I really wanted you to be part of our special summer series because I want to know what you're up to and how you've been doing, and more than anything else, how is our city doing right now? Because I got the sense when the handshake deal was made, there was a handful of folks who said, I'm not standing with this city budget for the year. There was a handful of folks who said nope. And you made your statement and said, this is why I am not in support. And it was all about BX. Can we start with how are you? How's the Bronx? And what are you thinking about what's next?
Well, one, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here with you. Appreciate you inviting me and having this summer series. And I want to just make a small correction. It is not that I don't like gratitude. I appreciate their gratitude. I'm very appreciative of people seeing my work, but I just try to remind people that this is my job, and I'm happy and honored to do this job. And so I don't always need people to say thank you for showing up. Like, that is my job, and this is what I ran for office for. This is what I asked people to vote for, and so I am doing what the people of my community and district need and want and deserve. And so for me, I just want the work to speak for itself, and I appreciate the gratitude and I take it, but so often folks feel the need to thank elected officials because that's more of a formality, and I want to make sure that people understand that I want to do this work. And so if people don't come to your office every day and say, Greg, thank you for your job, I don't feel like people need to thank me every day for the work that I do.
I respect that. Thank you for that correction made. And I do understand and appreciate that. I'm mentioning it because every time I'm always see you, and I'm always like, whether it is we're sleeping outside City Hall, you're the council member who shows up and checks in with the nonprofit executives that are doing out there, and we're laughing and joking, whatever. And when that moment where I'm like, it's great to see you here, you're like, this is what I do. This is who I am. This is what I represent.
Yeah, but if you're out there, why wouldn't I be out there, right? Like that's your job too. So that's why it's like, thank you for the work that you're doing and putting your body on the line and speaking out for your staff that's out there on the front line doing the work that so many electeds are talking about. I say this all the time. Nonprofit leaders are doing the work that we brag about. When we talk about the food distributions, none of us are out there doing that. That's the work of these nonprofits. When we're talking about a lot of the case management, especially when the city fails and not supporting folks, we're sending them to the nonprofits to get those supports. And so, thank you guys for that constant work. So it's my job to show up and let you know that you're supported and that elected officials hear you and understand the work that you're doing, because the city gets a lot of praise for the work that they do, but the nonprofit is I like to say that they're like that fourth arm of government that no one kind of appreciates, because all of the work that the city doesn't want to do, they contract out to nonprofits. And so it's just me lifting up that work.
I appreciate you lifting that up, and I think you lifted up partially because you were not always an elected official. I'm not sure you always aspired to be either. Let's back up. How did we get to this particular place?
I mean, I worked in a nonprofit sector for over 20 years. I worked at a number of nonprofits, but my focus was always youth development, which is why when I first got here, I worked so hard and advocated so loudly to be the chair of Children and Youth Services, because I thought that was a chair that sometimes didn't feel like got the attention that it needed. And when you're thinking about having oversight of an agency, and at that time it was only DYCD, having oversight of an agency that does 85% of the contracting for the city, understanding how it's synonymous not just with youth, but also the nonprofit sector. And so how do we work with that agency to continue to push the work, because that's where a lot of the money flows through. And so that work was really amazing in the sense of it like combined the two things that I was most passionate about and had the most expertise on, which was youth development and nonprofit. And so when I first got here for the first 2 years, it was just DYCD, working with our former speaker, Adrienne Adams. She then added on ACS. And one of the reasons why I fought to get ACS is so we could have an umbrella approach on how we are addressing young people in general, because so many of the programs that were happening in DYCD, I'm like, wait, there's double over here. How are we working, and how do we connect the dots between those two agencies? And so it's really grown for me to be able to, like, I like to say I'm like the mother of all these babies in the city, and looking at the work in that lens of like having through lines from programming, and then also thinking about how do we then support and uplift the nonprofit folks. One of the things that's also really funny, Councilmember Ressler, Lincoln Ressler, who is the chair of contracts, he loves to say I'm his co-chair of the contracts committee, because we also work so close, because
right.
Like I said, 85% of the contracts go through DYCD.
DYCD. I appreciate so much your focus on being thinking about the umbrella. And I bring that up because as someone who's in the workforce development space, there's a number of challenges. We've talked in this podcast about the fragmented nature of the workforce development ecosystem in New York State. In other words, there's 20 agencies with a hand in workforce development, right? How do we do that? The most significant commitment I would suggest the city makes that it recognizes as, and I'm using quote to air quotes, workforce development would be summer youth employment. And I have a massive respect as someone who ran summer youth employment programs and engaged in them for what that is, but that's different than what workforce development could or should be.
Oh, that's
and
like
you know
the
that.
Tip
that's like
of
the
what?
tip. But I think what's interesting is like we don't think about the umbrella nature of things. I appreciate that you sort of said, yeah, I need to look at DYCD and I need to look at ACS, right? Like if I think about workforce, I have to think about DYCD and I have to think about SBS and I have to think about where does the Economic Development Corporation fit in, which now has a new president, et cetera, right? Like that you thought in umbrella terms, I think is very related to probably your history in nonprofit space, because if you were worried about young people, you probably weren't just worried about their education.
No,
like that's not what you do in this work in the space.
Say, that's not how you develop young people. Education is not the only way young people are to learn.
There it is.
And should learn.
There it is.
Like, let's be clear. I was in youth development by choice. I did not want to be a teacher because it's very limited on what you can teach children. In my role as after school director and LTW coordinator and department director.
Learn to work.
Learn to work.
DYCD, Department of Youth and Community Development. SBS, Small Business Services.
Sorry, I know we're having a lot of inside baseball talk, but Learn to Work program and all those roles, it was really about how do I get to show up for young people and give them information that DOE is actually lacking in, because they're not able to do all those things. And so often people only see the school system as a way for young people to learn. That is one way, but all these other ways we need to be pouring into young people.
I think that's right, and I'm lucky in the course of my career. I worked at The Door. I worked at Children's Aid, Stanley Isaac's Neighborhood Center. During the course of that journey, I got to work with young people. I got to work with older adults. I got to work in the space of thinking about healthcare as much as I got to think about the space of early childhood programs, et cetera. And I think there's a unique experience that we have in the nonprofit space, which is like we have to think about all the different moving parts. And what I think undercuts the city's ability sometimes to find effective outcomes for folks who are resilient and powerful but also struggling sometimes is that we don't know how to stitch together to have meaningful conversations and investments that can focus on a whole family. That can focus on a whole individual.
Can I tell you one of the main issues for that is?
Yes.
Not enough people from the nonprofit sector are in politics. me coming into this work and understanding nonprofit and seeing how a lot of these RFPs and seeing how a lot of these programs are rolled out, they're coming from people who haven't done the program, right?
That's right.
So I remember our first budget when we kind of like had a hiccup with DOE and some education stuff, and they put all this money in at the end of the budget, and I kept being like, hey, do you guys understand that like that money won't get to those providers and schools until about maybe May, and then at that point it actually becomes a burden to have to spend the money,
right.
And folks don't understand it. I'm like, oh, we won, we got this, and this is great. And it's like, so now you dump money on me, because I don't think people understand, like, it becomes a dump, and then having to scramble to justify doing programs where it's like, if I would have got this at the beginning, I'm able to plan things out, I can do trips, I can be thoughtful and meaningful. And so because so many people do not come from this work, it's hard for them to understand. And so I think that, like, one of my biggest acts and hopes is that me being in this space has made it clearer to nonprofit folks that they need to be a part of these conversations and be in these seats, right? Especially at the city level. I think it's so synonymous that a lot of nonprofit people don't think about government, but I'm like, you guys it's so intertwined with the work. It's so intertwined. And so we need to make sure that we have people not only in elected seats, but at these city agencies who understand this work, understand procurement. I mean, I want to give a huge shout out to our DYCD commissioner, who I think came in, and because she comes from this work, is being so methodical about all the things. I remember our first conversation, we were talking, she was like, I understand we're a contracting agency. And so with that, I need to figure out how to get this money out the door. And so she's been methodical about that, in addition to rolling out a new RFP for after school and saying, like, okay, this, if we don't fund all these programs, this would be harmful. So how do we mitigate these things? And I think that is important for us to see ourselves in these spaces and using our expertise of the work that we've learned over the years that looks very different to come in these spaces and not just be advocates, because that's what ends up happening. I was an advocate for like 15 years, advocating for after school, advocating for workforce development, and advocating for these programs. But now I'm in the position where I'm like, okay, this is how this works, and we need to occupy these spaces.
Shout out to, as you said, DYCD Commissioner Sandra Escamilla. She's a phenomenon, knows youth development in ways that people have learned from, gained from, understood. That she is leading that agency right now is thrilling. And to your point, the understanding that she has of what contracting is and isn't, and the burden that is on her to deal with, as you pointed out, 80+% of contracts that have to be managed. But listen, we've got listeners that are in the nonprofit space. We have listeners who are outside that space. But if you're in the nonprofit space, you know that contracting and procurement in this city is agonizing.
A hot mess.
And it's a hot mess. And even though there are people who have made progress, it's still so fractured. And
because it's one of those things that, like, what we do in government, we overcorrect, right? So because we had some bad actors, we like overcorrect and say, like, now we need to put in this regulation, we need to do this, and not understanding the mess and long-term mess that we're creating. Another thing that I think in the city we need to be looking at is, why aren't we using more technology? Some of the stuff that we have is so antiquated where it's like, okay, we can be using more, technology and AI and things like that to kind of like streamline some of this work. And sometimes it's very disheartening to see how antiquated our systems are.
And we understand that those investments take, those changes take investment to solve. What's the biggest problem is that one thing we can't do is like press a pause button on everything, take 30 days to figure out how things work, and then start again, because
we're building a plane as we fly.
You're literally, and it's on fire in some cases, and in some places.
The engine just blew out.
Exactly. So then how do we respond to that in real time? And I think we could probably also argue that the city is not in the best economic position it's ever been, although there's been some good news most recently. But we're still, the city is not, I would suggest, while we're feeling good in some ways, there's a lot of infrastructure issues that are really challenging for us. There's still unemployment numbers that are staggering in different communities with different groups.
Absolutely. I've been yelling about the unemployment rates for young people.
That's right.
From the rooftops. And honestly, it often feels like into no avail, because when you're thinking about youth unemployment and us still being at numbers higher than it was before COVID,
Yep.
And looking at Black New Yorkers, young New Yorkers, where it's even higher, I think it's at like 26%. For Black young people between the ages of 16 and 24, there has been no real plan to say what is the issue and how do we combat this? I've been pushing and talking more about how do we have year-round SYP? How do we have expansions of learn to work programs? Because yes, I come from learn to work, but those programs have data that show that it works.
Yeah.
How do we expand Futures, what is it, not Fair Futures? It's the other Futures program that's in schools.
The Future Ready program.
Yeah, Future Ready program. And so looking at all these different programs and saying, if we expand, SYP and Work, Learn, Grow, and have that cover all the students who might not be in school and
That's
all
right.
the students who are in school having those options, we would bring that unemployment rate up. But the city has not taken a real look at it, right? When I'm saying to folks when I'm talking to young people are saying, I want a job.
Mm-hmm.
It is not like how it was when I was growing up, where I was able to go and work at my local supermarket or work at Hallmark. I'm aging myself. Or
It's all right. Love that.
or working
Good.
at Godiva or whatever, and being able to go get a job.
Right.
Young people are not being hired now. Most places won't hire you till you're
That's right.
18. And so if businesses are now taking that stand,
That's right.
how are we giving businesses incentives to even hire young people? And so, my thing is, we got to look at this as a tiered approach of saying, we have to give young people options. And then if we're not giving them jobs now, then how do we expect them to get a job at 25?
Now, what's crazy is you and I had this conversation a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as I said, the first person I sort of talked to in this work, in this particular role, was you. On video, zooming it and talking about what we were doing, and we had a lot of the same concerns at that time. I mean, what is it that you think holds us back as a city from making these investments or these commitments? In other words, why do we keep replaying? Maybe a better way, not replaying the same plays. I think it's different. We're not committed to solving certain problems when it comes to young adults in particular, Black New Yorkers, I think absolutely. And different neighborhoods and communities that, if you rewind the numbers, the unemployment rates are bad, if not worse, right? Mm-hmm. Why do you think it is? Now, you've been in elected office now for how many years?
30 and a half.
Good Lord. Could you imagine? After all this time, and I know it hasn't been 30 years, but in your what is it that keeps us?
It's not a priority.
It's not a priority.
It's not a priority.
Tell me more.
And when folks make it a priority, it'll get solved, right? When you're thinking about, okay, if everyone said we really want to get to some of these core issues, then it will become a core issue, right? When everyone is saying, we are in a housing crisis, we're building out of control to say, we have to build, we're softening up regulations, we're making it easier for developers to develop, we're giving them incentives and initiatives, so we're building. If we say we want to prioritize young people getting jobs, and we're going to give businesses initiatives, we're going to expand learn-to-work programs, we're going to expand vocational learning, we're going to expand all these things, because the reality is that's actually going to help the housing crisis, right? If you are doing, work-ready programs and getting the workforce ready so that they can step into these jobs, it actually would ease some of it, but it's not a priority. When you're listening to most people in politics, they're not talking about a plan around workforce development. They're talking about...
they don't know what workforce development is.
Right. I mean, here's the other piece. I'm going to give you a quick story. When I was running for office and I was doing a training and one of these trainings to run for office, and one of the questions they asked you, they were like, what's your base? Who's your base? And right, they want you to think about who your base is. And I was like, well, young people's my base. That instructor looked me in the face and said, oh, so you're going to lose. Young people don't vote. I said, okay. I was like, well, that's who my base is. Young people are my base. Mm-hmm. Clearly, that wasn't the case, because young people were my base and I still was able to win. But that is the mindset, right? When you're thinking about elected officials, often they don't see young people in this fight. But the reason I ran for office was because young people told me, literally verbatim, no one's ever asked me to vote, nobody wants me to vote, and nobody wants me to be a part of this, so why would I? So when people see that I'm so passionate and I'm always talking about young people and bringing them into spaces, that's because those are the people who told me I should be in this space, and they asked me to give them a voice, and so that's what I've been doing.
I'm grateful for you for the voice that you have brought. Your chairmanship of the youth and children, the committee in the city council. If you've not experienced a hearing that the council member has led, you really need to just take it in. I think what's interesting in some of those moments, and again, this is you speaking to your history and to your constituents. You both, I think, in those circumstances, seek to represent things that matter. And I also think I've never seen you be unapologetic about calling out what sounds to you maybe as if someone from the admin or otherwise is just, I don't want to say blowing smoke, but is just telling some story about how things are working when you know on the ground is not.
I mean, I think it's also part of the problem, right? Like, let's not pretend if there's an issue, let's talk about it and figure it out together. And I want to be clear. I'm never calling people out with the intentions of, like, go figure it out. I'm saying, like, what is the problem and how do we figure it out together? I'm not a stranger to rolling up my sleeves and getting there and working and being a thought partner and giving suggestions and, like, supporting and all the things. But we have to have honest conversations. If you're saying everything is great and these programs are going great, and I'm talking to the young people and I'm talking to families and I'm getting nothing but negative feedback, then what is it that we're doing? Like, this doesn't seem real. Mm-hmm. And so for me, let's have a real conversation. Like, if we have a program and I have people, like, I tell people all the time, I'm going to get the negative. Like, folks are going to call me and tell me when things are going bad. That's just the facts. And so I want us to be able to talk about it. If I have a family who's calling me and saying, like, hey, I put my kid in this program, they hate it, it's not a good program, it's terrible, they don't want to go. It's my job to report back to be like, so how are we fixing this? And not being like, well, you guys are doing a great job. Yes, there's other happy people, but there's also people who are struggling. So let's make equity happen so everyone can feel like they're part of this process.
Is it particularly agonizing, again, as someone who sat in the crowd during hearings, is it particularly agonizing when you hear the admins say that they are staffed well?
Listen, I know people have a job, right? And so their job isn't to come out and expose their bare bones, right? But for me, I have a job. My job is oversight. Like, I think sometimes people forget what we are supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not about, like, a gotcha moment. Like, it's not like I'm not Dick Tracy out here trying to, like, break a case.
I love that you're using Dick Tracy and Hallmark and, like, I love that. I love every reference. Like 80s,
every reference.
90s. I'm with you all the way
and
on all of these.
Like, who don't have young people listen. They're gonna be
like, look it up. Look it up, people. Google it.
But, like, I'm not trying to have a gotcha moment. I am literally, like, saying my job is to have oversight, to ensure that you are doing the best job that you're doing. And that's all I'm doing. People get upset because I say it's anybody. Anybody sitting across from me from this dais is going to get the smoke. I don't care who you are. And it just is what it is.
That's right.
And it's not coming at you saying that you're a bad person, because I want to be clear. There are people working so hard at these agencies. There are people.
Yes, absolutely.
99% of these people have good intentions and want to work hard and want to show up. And so it's not saying that you're not doing a good job. It's saying, like, hey, this is a blind spot. Let's fix it. Hey, maybe you didn't notice this. Let's fix it. It is not saying, like, you're a terrible person and you got to go. No, it's saying, like, hey, just so you know, this is what's happening. And I'll give a prime example, DYCD. Mm-hmm. It is very hard for a nonprofit to go to their funder and say, this program sucks. You're funding them. Or say, I am struggling. How can you help me? And it's a weird power dynamic. And so I'm always trying to, like, highlight that, because they're like, well, providers can come tell us. I used to be a provider. I wasn't telling you anything.
Right. Yeah, right. Because if you do, there tends to be a consequences.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's like, if I need help, where do I go? You know, I know we have MONS now, which is the Office of Nonprofit, and they're to be supportive. Yep. Really happy about their new executive director, mm-hmm. Annie Mingus.
Annie, shout out to Annie.
Going to be great. Excited
Fantastic.
About the work. But
welcome,
like,
Annie.
There always needed to be a separation of that, because yes, I DYCD is there to be a partner, and they want to be able to help and support providers. But because you are their funder and you can turn their lights on or off,
That's right.
it becomes very hard. So that's why I've also become the complaint bureau, because people are going to come to me to tell me what the issues are because they're scared to tell the provider.
That's that buffer. And I will say this. In particular, of all the agencies I've had relationships with over the years, from the Department for the Aging to Department of Veteran Services, Department of Youth and Community Development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as you pointed out, the number of people who are working extraordinarily hard to figure out how to make things work and to be successful and to serve the city and to serve communities, absolutely without question. And also, I have seen the investments that have been made, DYCD and other agencies, in capacity building and technical assistance, and at the same time, the compromising factor, as you pointed out, is about funding. If you know that your funding is still a pass-through, you want to make sure that you're representing the needs and interests, and there's an inherent concern and challenge in being able to talk about hard things. And in my experience, I've had really skilled, smart, amazing DYCD folks in particular intervene on my behalf in terms of running organizations to try to figure out how to solve problems. But also, I'm well aware of, both within my shop and other shops, how hard and challenging that can really be, even if the agency is saying, we want to help you.
Right.
You still have to go through that process of being like, well, we're not matching up with our expectations,
Right.
or
Like,
it's broken and it's not working. What do I
Who wants to go to
do?
mommy and daddy and tell you that I'm messing up?
It's agonizing. It's literally agonizing, and you lived it. I think that's what's interesting, is that you bring that lived experience to the table, and other folks. We'll pull back the curtains entirely here in some ways. You know, like I do too. I think one of the complexities in the nonprofit space is, if you're in that space and you're a 501c3, you're not supposed to be in the business of politics.
Nope.
You got to be the neutral player.
Yep.
You got to represent the interests of your
Everybody.
community. You have to serve your mission. Your dollars are looked at in the audit space. And by the way, how many executives have gotten called out about getting salaries, although if they ran for-profits, no one would say a word. But it's because non-for-profit becomes a challenge.
That's one of the things where I had to educate people on, because if you look at most executive directors, their salary doesn't come from government contracts.
That's right.
That's
exactly
something that
it.
often needs to be called out. Like, if you're a good executive director, you are worth your salt, because you're out there raising money for the organization,
Absolutely.
and most of it is your salary.
That's exactly right.
And so I don't think people even understand that, because I remember being in a hearing and they were questioning folks around their salary, like, why is this person making this much? And I was like, you're asking the wrong question. You need to ask how many are on a government contract, because that's
right.
not what's happening
That's
here.
right.
The director of the program is on that government contract, which is typically at 85, 90, because the contracts are not equitable. They're on that salary, but most executive directors' salary does not come from your government contract.
That's right. And your government contracts are paying 80 cents on the dollar or less, more 70, probably more like that now. I want to say this too, just because we talked about the number of people in the nonprofit sector who find their way into running for office in different ways. And what I think is really interesting about that is, and we've had circumstances over the last X number of years in the city where in a moment where someone has a particular interest, maybe I'm interested in an elected official, or maybe I'm interested in someone who's running for office, and I run a nonprofit, right? Listen, the commitment I make has to be a personal one, and I can't, on behalf of my organization, stand behind someone who's running like that. This is the level of focus on that is so intense, and there's also
because if you pick the wrong person and they don't win,
well, then
now
what
your
happens?
organization is punished. And that's
that
a real
can
thing.
happen, and that's a real thing.
And that has happened. Not can, it has and does.
This is real talk. This is a real thing. And not for nothing, by the way, if you're in the nonprofit space, you don't get and I do make a commitment as a personal individual to a campaign, the match doesn't work. You don't get the matching dollars either. So if I'm running for office, whose interests do I want to represent? It gets tricky, right? I mean, there has been a lot of debates amongst my colleagues and myself around that, because that was one of the things around the matching of it is not fair, right? Because a person like me, prime example, I come into this space, the bulk of my friends are a nonprofit or work in government, and right.
So you are pretty much trying to not encourage people who are doing grassroots work to be in politics. and I feel a way about that because if I'm a developer or a real estate agent or something like that, you can.
Well, there's your 8-to-1 match, by the way, right? That you get. You can't get that match on the not-for-profit job, the government job.
Or if I work in a private sector, I can also give influence and push.
Exactly.
But if you work in the nonprofit space, it limits you. And I'm like, that's something that's real, where you're encouraging people like me to not be here. And I've said that in multiple spaces and multiple times of like, do you want us here or not?
That's right. And we know that the alternative pathway is related to, the 501c3 versus the 501c4 model, the different distinctions that you can have. If you're going to run a C4 that's different than a C3, you need to have a whole separate structure to be able to do that. Shout out to Human Services Action Group for having championed that in the human services side. But again, you have to build your own structures to be able to do that, to be able to make that, to execute on that. But I just keep coming back to this idea of, how do we get folks to represent the needs and interests of communities if folks are not connected to community, or you're not, as an elected official, seeing how it is that you are going to be able to maintain your position ultimately if you don't get those particular commitments? I know you have a specific lens on that, and I appreciate it because you came from the nonprofit sector. The question for you is, when was it where you said to yourself, I need to run for office?
I mean, the reality is after that orange man won the first time.
The orange man. We just used orange man. Yeah. That's it. We don't say anymore.
Or the hair. When he won the first time, I just remember just feeling like, ugh, this can't be it. Like, this can't be it. So I started to organize youth forums in my community with young people. It's always just been my thing. So I was literally doing youth forums. We did one on civic engagement. Well, all of them were around civic engagement, but this one specifically around voting registration. What does it look like to be civically engaged? Because I want to be clear, voting is not the only way to be civically engaged.
That's right.
Talking about joining community boards and how do you organize and all these things. And so at the end, we were having a debate around why it's important for young people to be civically engaged. And they kept being like, what are you talking about? And mind you, most of the people in the room were probably between the ages of like 16, and some were, maybe the oldest was like 20. They're like, what are you talking about? Some of them were like, I can't even vote. So what do you mean? How do I be civically engaged? So we were like going different ways.
What are the other ways to do that?
Yeah. And then we did get to voting of like, who's registered to vote? Why aren't you registered to vote? Have you ever voted? And they kept being like, literally, one of them just got so angry, was like, Miss, you just need to stop. Like, no one's ever asked me to vote. Nobody wants me to vote. And like, why? Like, this is not a thing. Like, they don't want to be involved, so I don't want to be involved. And I'm like, that's not true. I'm literally having a forum on youth civic engagement. So I clearly want you to be part of this fight. I need you in this fight. And then another young person looked at me and was like, then you should run. We know you care, miss. We know that you will have our backs and you have access to vote, so you should run for office. And honestly, at the time, I thought it was like a joke. And I was like, all right, whatever. Like, of course I should run. Because, again, I hadn't had any political aspirations. And I was just like, whatever, that's funny. And then I started talking to, like, my loved ones and being like, let me tell y'all what happened. These young people was like,
let me tell you the story.
And everybody I kept speaking to, they was like, we were just waiting for you to figure this out. It was like that's what you should be doing. Like, you need to do this. Like, what are you talking about? And I had to like take some time to realize, like, am I not doing it because I'm scared? Am I not doing it because I don't think that I'm worthy? Like, I had to go through my personal journey of like, okay, so then why aren't I doing this? And again, like, I kept just hearing the same thing. And there was a study that was done that most women and women of color have to be asked, I believe it's like 11 times to run for office before they even consider it. And because I kept hearing it so much, it was like, no, this is what I need to do.
Fascinating thing about that is need to be asked that many times, and then the data says the more women that are in office, it tends to be the better communities do.
Yes.
The better neighborhoods do, and the better people do, economically and socially.
We legislate a lot of times much more holistically.
Absolutely. Okay. Running for office, you make the choice. How much was it did you feel like it was a steep learning curve? Meaning, okay, now I'm going to run, so there are machinations you have to. It's not as simple as I declare. You've got to go through the paperwork. You've got to have a team. You've got to start building the pieces. How did that feel?
I mean, I think To be honest, all of that stuff is you can learn, right? Like
you can learn it.
It's not hard. People just weren't nice though. I think when you're looking at when I'm looking at what's going on in politics and government now in the city and across this country, we have to have a real conversation about like the Democratic Party and how they have been gatekeepers for so long and didn't want people to come in. So I'm a person who's an outsider. I never worked in government. I didn't have connections in government. And I didn't know people in unions or any of those things. I am a person who was in the community just doing work, doing work with families and communities. And so when it was time for me to run for office and I'm trying to get in this space, it was a lot of, who are you? Where did you come from? And folks weren't nice. I mean, and we have to have a conversation about that. And so when you're seeing other people coming that was emerging, they were taking a lot of folks who were in the fringes that people didn't want to give a chance to and started to uplift them. And so I think when I'm thinking about what I would like to see is like, how are we building up the bench, and not just the bench of people that we deem important or we deem that should be in these spaces. How do we build a bench to encourage people to be like, I want to get in this? Because honestly, when you're looking at like all the paperwork and how to run for office, they have so many trainings and
there's
things.
a lot of available options
like
to learn
you know,
that
when
stuff.
I was coming up, they had 21 and 21. That
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
you know,
Hugely successful.
Yeah, they had a lot of trainings. Then, you know, there was all these groups. Like, I was able to go to trainings and learn like how to do a stump speech and this and that. CFB does trainings on like the finance part and being a treasurer and
Campaign
learning
finance
that.
boards.
They do all of that. So you can learn that stuff. It's the other politics piece that gets hard, right? How do you get into the spaces to talk to other electeds? How do you get into spaces and connect with union leaders? How do you get into spaces to kind of like connect with people who are already here? And I think that to me was the hardest part out of all of this when I was thinking about running.
It's interesting, the language you used. You said people, it was not nice. And meaning, I'm guessing, and you sort of pointed to this to some degree, getting meetings with people. Getting in a space where you are heard, I'm guessing, was hard. Getting to a space where you're not automatically dismissed because you're not someone who, maybe someone who has been in a particular office or seat thought was the right match for the moment for any number of reasons. I'm guessing that's what you're getting. And that has to feel both overwhelming, demeaning, uncomfortable. I mean, it's as if the system is built to not want to get that new energy, that new commitment, the different voice.
Right.
That's the reinforcement of
and I mean, listen,
the power structure.
And I don't want to make it seem like I was able to do this on my own. Like, I was blessed in the sense of my mentor, Diana Ayala, who was... Shout out to her, who also is the nominee for a state assembly in East Harlem. She was one of those people who was holding my hand in a lot of these spaces, letting people know, like, no, she's the real deal. Like, and
there's your bridge, right there.
Literally that bridge, you know. And then, you know, even my borough president, Vanessa Gibson,
shout out to Vanessa Gibson.
She came in and she was clutch, where she was like, Althea's it. She's the person, and was walking me around, you know, introducing me to people, you know. Another assembly member, Chantel Jackson.
Shout out.
She won the primary the year before me, and she literally was like, we are in this together. So I have to be clear and grateful that I had a bunch of women who surrounded me to make sure I got across that finish line. But before them, I don't know how someone would be able to do it. But they were there, and they were supportive, and they were like, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to go knock these doors. We're going to go do this. And we were out there together. I mean, even with BP, me and her were the two that were running the races at the same time together. I had faith that she was going to win and be the borough president. But she was like, I knew you was going to win my seat. So it was just like this weird synergy. It was like, girl, I don't know about me, but you're going to win. And she was like, what are you talking about? She was like, you're going to win. Like, so it was such a weird thing that we're like out there on the campaign trail together. But like, I can't lie. I had women who like stood in the trenches with me, and they saw how mean people were treating me. And they were like, nah, we're not doing this. And we're going to hold her hand to get her across the finish line. And it was like, no questions asked. Like, it was like, let's do this. And so for me, it's thinking about how do we make sure that is a continuous thing. So I'm always trying to make sure that I'm bringing young people in spaces and letting them know, like, you keep knocking on those doors and you don't need anyone's permission, right? There's this unspoken rule that you need to ask for permission to run from whomever,
to be anointed to do certain things.
And that's not the truth. You don't need anyone's permission. Only people's permission you need is the community people that's going to vote for you and put you there. That's the permission you need.
Powerful words. You live the story. You're also highlighting the idea of lifting while you climb, that idea that people are reaching out to each other and supporting each other. That only comes from earning, I think. You highlighted a group of amazing, dynamic, powerful women who you flagged as mentors, as partners in this work, and who opened up doors in some ways for you. You earned that, right? Like that takes work to do. You have to show and prove to get to that space. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And all of those women work really hard.
And they lived it and they worked it.
Also had similar challenges that I had.
Exactly. Okay. So now you're a council member.
Now I'm a council member.
You can't see this if you're listening to this, but like I said that, and then the council member kind of like looked down over at the phone for a minute and shaking her head. Council member, how's it going?
It's going. I mean, I want to say that I feel honored that I get to wake up each and every day and fight as hard as I do for a district that often feels like they're not heard, they're not seen, and nobody cares, and no one's going to show up. So I feel honored. Like, I wake up like, I'm going to fight.
Tell us about the district.
So, I mean, listen, I think our district is beautiful. I think that it is full of resilient people who turn lemons into lemonade every single day. I think that we get so much stuff thrown at us in our community. Our district is one of the districts that has the most shelters in the city. We're slated to have the most supportive housing coming into the district and have the most supportive housing in the city in the next 2 years. We have, I believe, about 2 reentry programs already in our district. So we have a lot of need in our community. We also are one of the districts that have the most affordable housing in the city, right? So everything that everybody always is like, oh, I want, we got, right? And so I'm honored to be able to come and be like, hey, this is what we got, and this is what we're going to do. But I think for me, it's saying, if we are going to be asked to do more than other districts, then we need to have more resources.
Be specific about that. We're going to be asked to do more. So now I think it's important for people listening to connect the dots here. As you pointed out, your district, more affordable housing, supportive housing, reentry programs, et cetera. So some people would say, well, if you've got all that, what more do you need? You got all this resource. It takes more than that to ensure that people are doing well.
I want to paint a picture.
Paint that picture.
Let's be Picasso for
Let's
a
do
moment.
it.
When you think about the
Picasso moment, here it is.
When you think about the tale of two cities, and you see districts that are thriving, and they have folks who are coming in who have wealth, they have home ownership opportunities, they're getting additional trash pickups, they're getting, events, open streets and all the things. And then you have another city where it's a concentration of poverty, where you have people who are struggling every day. Our schools aren't being invested. We have an overwhelming number of charter schools in the district, and enrollment is down in our public schools, enrollment is down in the charter schools because there's such a big concentration. It becomes a place where you're just having a place of poverty, of concentration. And again, we're okay with that, but those people need more services, right? Where are the mental health supports? How do we make sure that we are supplying our nonprofits with the money and resources to go out and do that mental health services support? Because we have so many shelters, right? How are we making sure that we are also supporting them with housing opportunities, right? When we're thinking about that, when we're thinking about the reentry work, right? If we're seeing that we have these reentry programs, how are we creating job opportunities, right? How do we create recreational supports for young people that's in these communities? Like, what does that look like? And I think it's about having a conversation about what does a thriving community need in order to thrive, right? And so we want the same opportunities everybody else gets. When we're thinking about resources. If my district is dense, I have all these big buildings. How do we make sure that we're making sure that businesses are coming here? What are the business opportunities? When you're thinking about we're going to have all this supportive housing, how do we make sure that there's enough supermarkets? My district is a huge food desert where there's not a lot of supermarkets. How are we making sure there's transportation infrastructure? When you look at my district and in the Bronx specifically, the High Bridge area, they got 2 buses up there. And if the 13 gets stuck on Ogden Avenue, that's it.
That's it.
There's no investment there. When you think about my Boston Road side, when you go over to the 3rd Avenue side, that's it. It's only a bus. So it's a 2-fare zone that, like, if I'm at the tip of my district on like 170 something, I have to take a bus to 149 to get the train.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so when we're talking about we're building infrastructures and we're building buildings that don't have parking, cars are actually necessary in the Bronx. And I know it sounds great to be like, we need fast free buses. Yes, we do need fast free buses.
Agreed.
But if you're also not investing in other infrastructure things, transportation infrastructure, then where are you going to leave these?
What are your
folks?
other options?
Right. And don't tell me about no damn city bike. I will not get yelled.
You don't ride on a city bike?
I'm not getting yelled at another goddamn community board another community board meeting where I have seniors saying, like, are you telling me I should get on a city bike? Or families who have 2 and 3 children saying, like, how do I, like...
Yeah, how do we make this work?
Right. Like, let's make it make sense. So for me, it's like, well, we need to come up with those options as well. And so that's always my fight and my pushback around, like, this district is a unique district, and we need to look at it from a unique perspective.
So then the budget comes up. Before we get to the vote itself, is there anything you can tell me about what that process from inside the House looks like when a budget is being built or a budget response is being constructed in response to the administration's preliminary budget, et cetera? Is there anything behind the scenes that you can share about what this process really looks like and feel like? Because to me, it seems like a bit of a mystery.
Well, I'm not going to lie. This was my, 3rd budget?
Yeah.
And it felt like a mystery. I honestly did not feel like I knew what was going on. And I think that also kind of contributed to where I ended up. Because our budget response this year didn't kind of lay out our priorities. It laid out a response to how do we ensure that we don't, that we didn't need additional money, right? We didn't have it was in there, but it was like deep in there, but there was no real response of like, our priorities are
the housing.
Yeah. And that's usually what our response is. So we know when we get our marching orders, okay, this is our marching orders, this is what we're going out there fighting for. And so it felt very, from the start of like, well, what are we doing? Wait, what's the issue? Okay, all right, we know we want more money from the state. The mayor is making that clear. But what are we fighting for? So we're saying our side, we're saying we don't need more money. Okay, what do we want? Right? And so you get to a place where you're like, okay, so I don't really know what the fight is here. And I think even when I'm looking at the groups and advocacy groups, they didn't know what they were fighting for either. Because usually during budget season, folks are out there having rallies, they're pushing back and all the things. But I feel like my experience was no one really knew how to move, because it was like we got this fight at the state where we're pushing and saying we want to tax the rich and we want to push that. And we want more money from the governor and we want more money. And that was clear. But for me, as it stands in council, I was like, well, what is it that we want? And it felt like we were getting bits and pieces of our priorities as things were rolling out. So that put me in an uncomfortable space. And so a lot of times how it usually works, the mayor puts out his executive, we put out our preliminary, blah, 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 and it goes back and forth. But this year it just did not feel as cohesive as it had in the past.
Interesting to think about this, because I mean, again, the original budget projection was like, we have a massive deficit, right? That was the starting point, was a massive deficit. And I'm not going to tell you what face the council member just made, but it started that way. And they said, well, we need a reliance on the state. And then suddenly it was like, well, actually, the deficit doesn't exist anymore. And I'm not going to tell you what face the council member's making. As I'm saying that now, I'm also making a face, because I think that's a fascinating journey to be on. That's happening. But also, if we just kind of look back in time to other years you are in office, the budget conversations, interesting you flagging, advocacy groups sometimes being more clear about what's needed and what's wanted. And that wasn't clear in this case. I think some of that had to do with, felt like all the balls are up in the air. We don't know. But that's also, you could argue, a failure of not being able to have a pointed objective. Okay. But we also know there have been times looking backwards when you've been in office where the city has said, listen, we've got a gap we have to fill. And so we're not in a position where we're going to have to make specific investments. And I think the council has tried very hard to figure out how it could. So you've been through this journey, I think, of like, what is the budget look like? What are the numbers we're really working with? The council fighting about, like, is my math right? Is the mayor's math right? We went through that period of time. Then it's like, okay, well, we got gaps, so we're not going to be able to find investment right now because we're post-pandemic and we're still trying to figure out so we go through that period. Now we got a new mayor in place who goes, oh, we have a crisis. Actually, you know what? Turns out we don't have a crisis, and yet we push the crisis down to the next couple of years. Okay, it's interesting.
But that's every budget. We always.
But then I
push
guess
the
is that
crisis down.
every budget?
Every
cycle?
budget we push the crisis out. Like that's every.
Well,
budget.
that's true. We always say that's true. The
Citizens
Citizens Budget Commission will always say yes. You're always kicking the can down the road.
But that's how budgets typically work. It's like, do we want to spend the money now or do we want to spend it later?
Yeah.
That's every budget that is created in the city. Everyone tries to pretend like it's some nuance, but it's not. And the other thing I think sometimes it's important for people to know or understand is that the budget isn't, we're not just passing a budget for that year. We also have to balance the budget on out years.
Yeah,
as
you
well.
have to balance the out year
And
budget.
so sometimes the fight isn't about this year, it's about the out years. And like, do we want to make sure that, like you said, are we kicking the can down? How far are we kicking it down? Are we kicking it to the next administration?
Right.
Are we going to try to figure this out ourselves? And so that sometimes is the budget dance that I think sometimes people don't understand or get, because I think when most people hear, they're like, oh, we passed the budgets this year, they're thinking, oh, we only had to balance this year. No, we have to balance out the out years as well.
How hard is it to make decisions about where you think the money should go? I mean, you as a council member have, council members have a sort of discretionary dollars, but then, so we're talking about a macro issue and a micro issue, but like, how hard is it to have to decide? Because you must have hundreds of applications. People are asking for dollars, but also you have your own specific interests that representing your district. You also flagged all the different needs that your district has. How do you figure out how to allocate dollars?
I mean, I think for me it has been a process in the sense of like, who and how are you going to make this money work in the district? Like, what is the biggest impact that you can have with the money I'm able to allocate to you? And how do I see that impact? How are you partnering with us to ensure that the money that we're putting into the community is really being invested? So one of the things that we do, not only, and it's not specific to people we just fund, but in my district specifically, we have a nonprofit roundtable. We come together every other month where all the nonprofit groups are coming together. And the point of that has been to talk about collective impact, because so often these groups feel like we are mortal enemies. And it's like, no, you're not. You are not in competition with each other, but because people are fighting for contracts and people are doing these things, they don't want to share resources. They don't want to share information, because if a contract comes out and you get it and I don't, like, I'm upset. And that's because... Or
my staff member leaves my organization, goes to your organization. Yeah. They're getting paid more to do that.
But those are the tensions that we never want to talk about. No. Those are real things. But my thought process in the very beginning, and again, because I come from this world, it was thinking, how do we bring these organizations together and to take away this idea of you guys being in competition and come up with collective goals to move the needle? So if we're saying our collective goal this year is we want to see the numbers for gun violence to go down in the district. How are we all working towards that? All right, you specialize in seniors. How are we working with our senior population on this? Oh, you have a youth development organization. How are you doing that? Oh, you're a settlement house. You work with all of them. How do we connect the dots? Oh, I'm a small organization. I don't have space to do these workshops that I've been doing. Can I support and work with you? And so really trying to bring them together in order to do that. One of the things we're going to be working on this year specifically is public-private partnerships. One of the things that we've heard from our groups is that they have been struggling to get corporate sponsors in the Bronx. And so they really want to work together to think about what this looks like. The mayor actually came to one of our nonprofit roundtables about a month ago, and that was one of the questions of like, how can you help us work with companies to come to the Bronx and sponsor our events and be a part of this work. And, he said, yes, this is something we can work on and something we can help you with. And so that's going to be our focus this year, of really trying to think about what is this public-private partnership and get more sponsorships. I think we have in my district specifically, Yankee Stadium is there. We've been talking to them saying, like, what does it look like for you guys to be at the table, for us to think about what you do, because you guys do stuff in the community, but how do we, one, keep it in District 16 specifically, and also what does it look like for you guys to help us encourage other businesses to come here that already do business with you?
And what I want to highlight here in particular is both the vision and ambition. The collective impact conversation has been going on in this city and in different parts of the world for a long time. And there are positive things to be said, and there's also challenges. The idea of having backbone sort of players that are committed to specific goals that can't be 100 different goals. It's got to be a core set of goals with specific metrics attached to it that everybody leans into on the public and private side, can be absolutely difference-making. And also, as you pointed out, there's inherent competition issues there's inherent issues trying to figure out what the problem is and how do we want to solve it. And also, I think from our private sector folks who, are part of the tax base of this city, invest a lot of dollars, philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, et cetera. In some cases, I think they think, I'm giving enough dollars to hand off to the committee. I'm giving enough dollars to pay for the city's coffers. So if you asked me to do more than that, to make the commitment that it would take over, what problem are we trying to solve? No problem gets done in 6 months. It's like, how do we set this collective impact strategy in motion so over a period of time we can see change? That requires significant focus and investment and like a laser-like commitment to that change. Yeah. And I think it's a lot easier sometimes for folks. It's a lot easier for folks in the nonprofit sector to say, I might not be the best at working with older adults, but there's a contract available for that, so I'm going to jump in on it because I know I can use that. And it's a lot easier for the private sector folks to say, you know what, I'll kick in $150,000 to do a program, and I'll get some great optics and some pictures. Yeah. But none of that is going to actually move the needle, which is why if we look at the data from D16 from X number of years ago, the question would be what's changed and how do we want it to change and what collective impact strategy is necessary to see that change. Yeah. How hard is it to get people to stand with you? Because you're getting the roundtable, the mayor shows up. How hard is it to get people to commit to that? And how does that relate to your decision on the budget?
I think, well, what do you mean? How hard is it to get like the groups to commit to that?
Yeah, you got how hard. Maybe a better way to say it is, how do we get people to make commitments over time? First, and then the second part is to say, you have a vision for the Bronx, and
I have a vision for my district.
You have a vision for your district, D16, and your commitment to that vision of what that is influenced, I think, how you chose to about this budget. So let's try to connect the dots as best we can, right? So tell me how it is that you see change happening. How do we get folks to make long-term commitments?
Well, I've always believed that when you're doing good work, everybody's going to be a part of it.
There you go.
People are going to want to jump on the bandwagon, and so I don't care when you want to get on, as long as you get on. So when we're thinking about the work that we're doing, I'm not doing it with the intention of like who wants to be a part of it. You're going to want to be a part of it at some point. So if you want to get on at the start, or if you want to get in the middle, or you want to come on at the end, do whatever you got to do. But good work will speak for itself, and it will always speak for itself.
Well said. Well said. Tell me about your decision on the budget.
Well, I think there was a lot of good things in the budget. And even how I was saying before, like there was a lot of confusion about like what we're fighting for. Mm-hmm. I want to give a special shout out to the Progressive Caucus and City Council. I think that was a space where we had clear goals about what we wanted to see and clear things that we were pushing for, like crisis to care, city FAPS, which was a huge win. Huge. And a long fight. And there was
and not enough. And again, I always feel like we always are like huge win and. Because I always feel like there's people who in this space who always say the same thing, which is huge win and
I'm not even saying it. I think that it was a huge win. I think it's going to support a lot of families.
A lot of families.
I think it's going to support young people because they'll have access to vouchers. So there was good stuff in the budget. I think that we had a plan. We knew what our plan was, and we stayed the course. You know, we fought really hard for NYCETC stuff that we didn't get as much as we wanted, but we did make some headway there. Supportive housing units, we fought for that, and I think that that's going to be a huge win and a huge push. But that's city stuff, right? Those are things that everyone in this city will benefit. And so when I'm looking at a budget and I'm looking at like specifically District 16, and when we're talking about how much supportive housing we have, when we're talking about how much shelters we're having, and then I'm seeing other districts that don't have the same burdens that I have getting millions of dollars invested into their community, I have to let my community know this is not okay. I think so often we're so appreciative of like, we were included, so I'm going to be excited about being included. I didn't come into this space to be included. I came to this space to make sure that my district got their fair share. Equity does not mean that everyone should get the same thing, because we don't have the poverty being, you know,
equally shared.
Yeah, it's not equally shared. So why should the money be then? And so if you want to, you know, have all of these shelters in my district, whereas like there's parts of the city that don't have one shelter. I have almost 30 shelters in my district.
Oh, and there are parts of the city where if anybody even suggests the
they're
idea,
protesting,
if the whiff in the air that it might happen.
We were just walking through and we saw
it's the end of days.
The world.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Even with supportive housing, there are members who will push back on having supportive housing in their district, right? And so for me, I need my district to know we are not just going to accept anything. Thank you. We're going to take it because I'm not turning any money away, but we should still get more. And we are going to expect more, and we're going to demand more. And we're not going to smile and grin and say, thank you, we appreciate it. It's the same way I don't want people to thank me for doing my job. I want people, I'm not thanking you for giving me or allocating money to our community, and it's not enough.
Is that a painful conversation to have with your colleagues when you make that decision?
Well, my colleagues didn't put me there, so I don't.
So it doesn't even, to you, it's about your district.
The amount of people that came up to me from my district and was like, thank you.
And is there a consequence within the council that if a council member chooses not to support?
What else are you going to do? Not give me more money next year?
What if?
Then what if?
Okay.
If you come from a district where people are already struggling and you want to keep punishing them because someone didn't fall in line, have you ever heard that saying from Tupac, who said, he's talked about how people are in the house and they're all eating their food and they're having a party, and then people are outside starving, and the first day they knock on the door and they're like, hey, we're hungry, could we have some food, could we have some food? And you say no, and then the next day they banging on the door, and by that third day they're kicking in that door. And that is what's going to happen if people continue to ignore districts like mine.
I want everybody who's listening to just reflect on that for a moment, especially considering the number of reports that have come out in the last few years on true cost of living. The Bronx disproportionately is struggling, has struggled, continues to struggle. It is every family size. And I think if you turn back the clock, as we've talked about during the course of this podcast, you'd see the Bronx in the same place, parts of the Bronx in the same place, parts of the Bronx.
And I want to be clear,
parts of the Bronx,
parts of the Bronx
in the same exact position. And I appreciate you flagging that. Parts of the Bronx, neighborhoods in the Bronx, those pockets. What does it take to get that banging on the door to be the next stage of kicking the door down to seeing the actual change we want to have happen?
I want to be clear. I believe the first step was having a leader in a space saying, we will not accept this. So it makes it easier for them to not accept it.
I thank you for how it is that you think about this work. I thank you for how it is that you represent your district. I thank you for being here with me today, making the trip from the Bronx to Manhattan. By the way, shout out to you and your family, because you started when you came in talking about having just come from the family gathering,
Yes.
family affair. How many people was it?
Well, total at the reunion specifically, we had like over 90 people.
90 people together. That must have been beautiful, joyful, and, as you pointed out when you came in, a handful.
Yes, I'm tired.
You're because you were dealing with multiple generations.
I mean, my oldest aunt was there. She's 94 years old.
Oh, God bless.
My grandma, who we were traveling with, she's 85. So
Who was the youngest? What was the range?
the youngest, we didn't have any babies there, so I believe the youngest was like 5 or 6.
5 or 6, and all of those folks and family and connections and love and dramas, and I'm sure a handful in every way imaginable. You must be just exhausted, because it's so much. Anybody who has multiple generations you're dealing with, and it was how many? 5 days?
We were there for 5 days.
5 days.
Yes.
Oh,
I was
heavens.
the Uber. I was the chef. I was the store runner.
Getting people dressed, getting people organized.
Carrying all the luggage. I was also the bellboy because I had to carry all the luggage. Exhausted. So shout out to my scheduling us early in the morning as soon as I got back.
I so thank you for making time for this conversation. Shout out to your team, your scheduler, the whole crew, the interns, the whole community, to D16 and everything it is, everything it can be, everything you are seeking to reflect and represent and want for what's next. Councilmember, thank you for being here. Thank you for who you are. I know you don't want to hear all that. I'll just say your service is your service.
Thank you.
Your service is your service.
I told you, I'm taking it with gratitude, and I'm appreciating you actually highlighting and saying thank you, because it is needed sometimes, because sometimes it does feel lonely. And I know for these last 3 years, especially the folks in the nonprofit space have embraced me, supported me, have listened to all my crazy ideas, and
they are crazy. They're just crazy ideas.
But not even
for
that,
equity and justice. So crazy.
When I'm thinking about not only folks in my districts calling me and thanking me for my vote on the budget, the next people who are right behind that are my leaders in the nonprofit space who was like, you did the right thing. And so I appreciate you guys seeing me and continuing to support me and getting this work done, because that's why I'm here, to push back on the narrative and shake stuff up. The status quo ain't the right quo, so that's why I'm here.
The status quo ain't the right quo. Councilmember, you are not alone, and I'm glad we're here with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for this time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.